The Exodus includes the first documented Passover and is one of the most enlightening examples of when a Hebraic 24-hour period starts. We see that the Passover is sacrificed during the portion of the 14th day of the first month. Israel then eats of the Passover that night, which is defined as the 15th day of the first month. Israel leaves Egypt the same night, still being the 15th day of the month. It needs to be noted that this is before morning even arrives. This would prove without a doubt that the order established in the beginning in Genesis 1 is still being followed in the time of the Exodus. If a Hebraic 24-hour period was a day first and then night model, then the Israelites would have left the night of the 14th, not the 15th, because according to the day first then night model, the 15th day would not have arrived until morning. Yet we see that such does not happen. Let's examine all of this more closely. The Israelites kept the lamb until the 14th day of the month. Exodus chapter 12. Tell all the congregation of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, every man shall take a lamb according to their father's houses, a lamb for a household. And if the household is too small for a lamb, then he and his nearest neighbor shall take according to the number of persons. According to what each can eat, you shall make your count for the lamb. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male a year old. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats, and you shall keep it until the 14th day of this month, when the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill their lambs at twilight, or between the evenings. The lamb was sacrificed at twilight. This would allow a few hours to prepare and cook the Passover by fire. The Passover was then eaten that night. Exodus 12:8. They shall eat the flesh that night. Roasted on the fire with unleavened bread and bitter herbs, they shall eat it. We are also told that it is a feast unto Yahweh. Exodus 12:14. This day shall be for you a memorial day. You shall keep it as a feast to Yahweh throughout your generations. As a statute forever, you shall keep it as a feast. This feast, in which the Passover lamb, unleavened bread, and bitter herb are all eaten, is called the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So when is the Passover Seder, or more biblically accurate, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, to be eaten? Answer: on the 15th day of the first Hebraic month, Leviticus 23. And on the 15th day of the same month is the Feast of Unleavened Bread to Yahweh. For 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. This also agrees with Exodus 12. And you shall observe the Feast of Unleavened Bread, for on this very day I brought your hosts out of the land of Egypt. This is why the Feast of Unleavened Bread and the Passover meal are stated to be the same day, the same feast. Mark 14, verse 1. It was now 2 days before Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And the chief priest and the scribes were seeking how to arrest him by stealth and kill him. The day that Israel is brought out of Egypt was at night. Deuteronomy chapter 16. Observe the month of Aviv and keep the Passover to Yahweh your God. For in the month of Aviv, Yahweh your God brought you out of Egypt by night. And Numbers 33 verse 3. They set out from Ramses in the first month, on the 15th day of the first month. On the day after the Passover, the people of Israel went out triumphantly in the sight of all the Egyptians. Israel observed the Passover or killed the Passover on the 14th day, during the day around 3 p.m. as commanded. The Passover is when the Passover lamb was to be slain. Exodus 12 verses 5 through 6. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male a year old. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats, and you shall keep it until the 14th day of this month, when the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill their lambs at twilight, or between the evenings. Leviticus 23 verse 5. And the first month, on the 14th day of the month at twilight, is Yahweh's Passover. The Passover is on the 14th day, being the time that the Passover was killed. Numbers 33 verse 3 declares that Israel left the day after the Passover, which would mean that they left on the 15th day of the month. Numbers 33 verse 3. They set out from Ramses in the first month on the 15th day of the first month, on the day after the Passover, when it was slain. The people of Israel went out triumphantly in the sight of all of the Egyptians. And of course, that was the night of the 15th. Deuteronomy 16, verse 1. Observe the month of Abib, and keep the Passover to Yahweh your God. For in the month of Abib, Yahweh your God brought you out of Egypt by night. In summary, here's the order of events. Number 1, Israel identifies a lamb on the 10th day of the month. Number 2, Israel sacrifices the Passover lamb at 3 p.m. on the 14th day. This is called the day of the Passover. Number 3, Israel eats of the Passover lamb that night. Number 4, Israel eats in haste, belts fastened, with the sandals on their feet, and staffs in their hand, so they are ready to go at a moment's notice that same night. Number 5, eating the Passover lamb that night is called the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and is declared to be the day that Yahweh brought Israel out of Egypt. The Feast of Unleavened Bread is declared to be on the 15th day of the month. Notice that morning has not yet occurred. Number 6, in the middle of the night, Yahweh struck down the firstborn of Egypt. Number 7, Pharaoh and all the Egyptians woke in the middle of that same night. Number 8, Moses and Aaron were summoned to see Pharaoh in the middle of that same night and tells Israel to leave. Number 9, the Egyptians were urgent and told Israel to leave in haste that same night, the 15th day of the month. Notice in all of this, and this is important, we went from the 14th day in which the Passover was sacrificed to the 15th day before morning even occurred. Thus, the 24-hour Hebraic day does not and cannot start in the morning. A morning then evening Hebraic day model is not compatible with the events outlined in the Exodus. The Passover is eaten on the 15th day of the month, which was defined as the night following the killing of the Passover on the 14th. Israel left that same night. A morning then evening Hebraic model forces the eating of the Passover on the 14th day of the month, as the night following the killing of the Passover lamb is then considered to be the same day. This would also mean that Israel eating in haste, with belts fastened, sandals on their feet, and staffs in their hand, was all for nothing if they were leaving over 24 hours later instead of the same night that they ate of the Passover. Objections. Despite the conflicts that would occur in a morning then evening model, there still are a few objections that need to be addressed. Israel is supposed to stay in their dwellings until morning. How then could Israel have left that same night? We know that Moses and Aaron certainly did not stay in their homes. Exodus 12, verse 31. Then he summoned Moses and Aaron by night and said, "Up, go out from among my people, both you and the people of Israel, and go, serve Yahweh as you have said." So why could Moses and Aaron leave? Did Moses and Aaron break a commandment from Yahweh? No, of course not. The answer is in Exodus chapter 12, verses 21 through 22. Everything previous to verse 21 is Yahweh speaking commandments to Israel. Everything after verse 21 is Moses speaking. Yahweh never stated to Moses to tell Israel to stay in their houses until morning. Yahweh told Moses that Yahweh will pass over houses marked in blood sometime during the night. Since Moses had no idea exactly what time this would occur, it was just common sense to instruct Israel to stay in their houses until morning. Obviously, though, once all firstborn had died, or a house was passed over from death, it was then safe to leave the house, as Moses and Aaron did when they went to go see Ramses. This is why we do not see such a commandment repeated in Deuteronomy, Leviticus, or Numbers. The instruction to Israel to not leave the house till morning was from Moses, not Yahweh, and simply based on common sense. Israel was to burn anything left over in the morning. If they left that night, how could they have accomplished that? Israel is also commanded to not have anything left over and to eat in haste. Should they have had anything left over, it could have been brought with them during the Exodus and burned in the morning. Exodus 12, verses 31 through 36, implies that they plundered the Egyptians after the firstborn had died. How would that have occurred that night? All of Egypt was already awake. All of Egypt wanted to send out Israel in haste, meaning immediately. Get out of here, not 24 hours later. Yahweh prepared Israel in advance to leave in haste. This would have all occurred that night. Leviticus 23, verses 5 through 6, does not say that the Passover meal must be eaten on the 15th. Passover is referred to as a feast. Mark 14, verse 1, also declares the timing of the eating of the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread to be on the same day. Luke 22, verse 1 states that the Feast of Unleavened Bread is called the Passover. The reason is that the Passover lamb becomes a feast. The only feast that makes sense is the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is stated to be on the 15th of the first month. The 14th is when the Passover is slain. The 15th is when the Passover meal occurred. Leviticus 23, verse 5, is noting the timing of the Passover sacrifice as between the evenings, which agrees verbatim with Exodus 12, verse 6. In conclusion, it is impossible for a morning then evening model to be reconciled with the events of the Exodus. The only model that does work is the evening then morning, which also agrees with Genesis chapter 1.